Hello, and welcome to another review video. This time around, I'll be looking at the My Hero Academia collab. This rerun introduces a new 7 Magic Stone RAM filled with 26 new units, and also brings back the original 6 Magic Stone RAM that includes all of the 31 previously introduced units. As it is often the case with collabs with new machines, you should prioritize pulling from the new RAM as the new units are better suited to tackle the newest dungeons. However, when it comes to My Hero Academia units, you might not be able to make a decently strong team if you lack some previously released units, specifically from Kaiju number 8. So if you like those units, then this could be a machine you could completely skip. Before looking into the REM units, I'll first take a look at some of the other My Hero units you can obtain without using magic stones. All for One and Overhaul are very unimpressive descended bosses, and since these aren't required for Sync Awakenings, I would say that you can safely ignore them after clearing their dungeons for the 1 Magic Stone reward. In the case of Overhaul, his dungeon is very annoying and will require to bring a team with high raw HP. It's not a difficult dungeon, but I wouldn't suggest bringing a modern leader with a pure damage reduction leader skill, since this dungeon will awoken bind you and skill bind you right away. Overhaul himself can also be obtained via black metal exchange, but I would suggest that you save up your resources, as again, this is a very lackluster unit. Gigantomachia and the new All for One are requirements if you want to activate the Sync Awakenings of the My Hero Academia transforming units. Therefore, make sure to at least max skill one of them if you'll be playing with any of these units, otherwise, you should be prepared to use a Sync Awakening Tamadra. This collab also has 4 Rainbow Metal Exchange units, so if you want to get them, make sure to farm enough tokens to be able to do all of these trades. None of these are particularly exciting, but maybe they'll come in handy, especially if you lack a deep monster box. If you're going to be farming the collab dungeons for either tokens or scale ups, keep in mind that you can get 30 plus points on certain plus limit breakthrough units if you include them in your team. Maybe you have faster and more mindless teams for the plus limit breakthrough Colosseum, but if you're going to farm these My Hero Academia dungeons anyways and have any of these units in either their base or other forms, I would suggest including them in your team if you can. Just remember to plus limit breakthrough them first. Also, you will only get the plus points in solo mode, and your helper will be ineligible for this plus point bonus. Midoriya Rising is the MP unit of the event, so like always, you could purchase them for 1 million MP or for $30, but the latter option is not something that I would recommend. This unit is really good for rainbow teams, so if you like playing those teams like main ideals, I would recommend looking into this unit. Midoriya is a bit similar to Maid Cecilia, and since the latest endgame dungeons keep requiring more and more bulk, his 3x HP boost will be a lot more handy. On top of that, Midoriya can also help solve board shrinks, problematic roulettes, and will greatly boost your team's damage output for one turn. This MP unit also sports a new Expert Multi-Match Awakening, so if this is a playstyle that you're interested in, you might want to grab a copy just for this alone. The MP unit's equip is also a decent choice for rainbow teams, but just like with the base form, if you don't care for these teams, I feel like Midoriya is an MP unit that you could skip. Before pulling the trigger on this unit, do remember the upcoming and returning MP units, as maybe your teams will better benefit from having any of these other units. Do note that the last one will be a new 5 million MP unit that will be added to the shop. Just like with Digimon and Bartenders, the first REM in this collab offers almost no value, especially if you care about assembling meta teams. That actually goes double for this REM, since the first machine doesn't have an equivalent to someone like Armageddon or the REM1 units in those previous 2 machines. Therefore, I would really not recommend rolling the 6 Magic Stone REM at all. That being said, some of the units might still have decent applications either in their base or equipped forms. Night is a quick cleric, though his damage output leaves a lot to be desired. At the very least, he can have up to 6 Ls and also has a somewhat decent equip. Eijiro can serve as a skill boost tech, but maybe his cooldown is a bit of a detriment and you might have better options. At least his equip adds a decent amount of bulk, but the active skill leaves a lot to be desired. Momo has a button equip, but this is relatively weak, so I would definitely not recommend chasing this, even if you lack similar units. Ochako could be used for some refresh teams, though these have very limited applications. Her equip does add a good amount of bulk and gives some damage and OE coverage, but Ochako is definitely not worth the chase. Ingenium's equip is actually pretty decent for Imperial Jamon teams, as all of its awakenings will be very useful in that tricolor team. Tokoyami is able to make up a 3-unit Dark PvP system, though chasing 2 or 3 copies of this unit is definitely not worth the trouble. His equip does give a lot of utility and bulk, but again, keep in mind that this is a mid-priority unit, so it could be a while before rolling him. Mirko is an interesting tricolor unit, so if you're interested in this type of playstyle, you might want to hold off in case we get Frieren, as that unit is a somewhat similar scaling combo leader. This unit's equip does see some use in some Reinhardt teams, as it can activate resonance on that unit, but since there are plenty of other choices, I would not recommend choosing this mid-priority unit. The two A-star bundle units in REM1 are frankly not that special. Shigaraki did get a significant post-transformation cooldown reduction, so now you only need 2 units to make up a system. This could work with some of the new Dark PvP units in the second REM, but those teams never caught on, so I would recommend that you save yourself the money. Both of the units do have interesting equips, but just like with the base, I would argue that they're not worth the money. Deku and All Might can serve as damage tech, but it is unfortunate that their active skill still has that restriction. The equip might have interesting applications due to its long-lasting cap break effect, but I doubt that this will be of much use, especially since it doesn't give you any bulk or more effective skill boost. This will enable units with self-reliance, but at the moment, no one is really itching for this. If you'll be playing any team that is mainly composed of My Hero units, then getting the badge might be something you want to look into. However, since a lot of the My Hero teams are not worth chasing, I would argue that making this exchange is not that important. You could amass enough fodder to get the badge unit from the second REM. However, only a few select units from REM2 are viable fodder. Therefore, it seems like if you want to get the badge, you will actually have to roll the first REM. A good chunk of the units from the second REM are also largely unimpressive. Some of these have decent damage multipliers or decent looking equips, but I feel like you can mostly do without them. Shoji and Wave Motion are a bit more interesting since they do offer fixed boards either on their base or equipped forms. These boards are not that impressive, but they might come in handy for a specific ranking. Natsume looks like your typical utility-focused cleric, so due to her awakenings, she might not be a bad choice in some wood or light teams. However, that might not be the case for any teams tackling the endgame, as her active skill is a bit lackluster. Nowadays, you would want the cleric to also have a large shield or an HP boosting effect built into their active skill. This cleric does come with a secondary effect, but her auto heal will not always be that useful. And like always, you might not be able to effectively loop this unit, especially if this is your only out to Awoken Binds or Unmatchable debuff. Her equip is also not that impressive, but there might be a few of you out there that might actually care enough to chase it, as this can enable Christmasly sets, Resonant Super Awakening, while at the same time turning that duo unit into a machine type. This is important if you're running that unit as an Imperial Diamond replacement and also want to get some damage out of her. The only other option that also enables that is Balboa's equip. That unit has been around for a while, so you might already have a copy, but if that's not the case, it might be easier to pull Hatsume from this REM, as Balboa is only available during certain Godfests or specific REM banners, and generally, these tend to not provide much value. Still, chasing Hatsume in the second REM is probably not the best idea, as a lot of the units in this collab won't be of much use for that team. Monoma is a lead swapper, and he probably won't be that useful for most teams, as this type of active skill is in low demand. It doesn't help that this unit requires a certain amount of Dark Orbs on the board, plus his second stage active skill doesn't even help counter an important mechanic, so in most teams, he'll be basically deathweight. This unit could be useful for farming XP or completing certain quests that require a collab or event leader, but meeting the condition will be very difficult for non-dark teams. The equip is a bit more interesting since this is the first one that can swap other units, though meeting the 37 skill boost requirement on the first turn will be very difficult, and you might have an easier time running other equips or units like Valentine Lee or some of the Toy Dragon Trio's equips. But if you often play co-op, then meeting the skill boost requirement should be fairly easy. Plus the 20 billion cap break might be key to one-hit KOing certain spawns. Stain and Davi are decent damage dealers for fire teams. However, in the case of Stain, it will be difficult to justify a team slot since he doesn't counter any common mechanic. At the very least, his equip is not that bad. It could come in handy in ranking dungeons due to the Nail Regeneration combination. And even if you don't care for the active skill, the equip awakenings are pretty decent for damage dealers. Davi does offer a quick solution to unmatchable debuffs, which can ease up the stress on your team's cleric, especially if you need to save the active skill for a big hit, for example. This unit also provides a full board change, which might come in very handy for some teams that are unable to override Orb. For example, the Deku and Bakugo team does struggle with that mechanic since they only generate 12 orbs. So usually, Dabi is not the first choice for this role, and someone like Buratina is run instead. Maybe if you like that GFE, or if you're running a monofire team, then Dabi might not be the worst option. Urabity and her duo are largely unimpressive. There really isn't a high demand for a light Skyfall unit, but this might be able to work with some units from Digimon. The duo is a low cooldown cleric that is also able to give you a full board change. Unfortunately, I don't really see where to use this. Due to the cooldown, you might be able to use this to close the orb chain loop in an Imperial Dramon team. However, take note that this unit does not give you a cap break effect, so a third of the time, your team will not be dealing any damage. At the very least, I think that these two units have somewhat decent equips. The first one is great on light damage dealers, and this can also enable the Resonance Awakening on units like Reinhardt and Fern. The duo's equip is pretty decent if you need a little damage boost and want to get more OE coverage. The active skill is largely unimpressive, and nowadays we have multiple equips that at the very least have 2 OEs of each attribute, so this might not seem that special, but this is not a bad option for those that don't have a deep box. As I mentioned, this collab brings a lot of dark PvP support, but none of the teams really stuck around. Tsukuyomi is a decent damage dealer, but to be able to use his active skill, you will have to have someone with the Dark Skyfall buff in your team, and from this collab, you could run someone like Edgeshot. Though even at full power, you will probably want at least one more Tsukuyomi in your team, since one turn of Absorption Void on a 3-turn cooldown will not cut it against tanky enemies. Edgeshot also brings damage to the table, but apart from the Dark Skyfall, he doesn't really offer much value. Putting combo absorption shields is pretty handy for BDP teams as they struggle to hit a high combo count. But seeing how Gung-Ho has been pushing combo void shields as of late, I wouldn't spend resources on these low combo units. These two's equips are pretty handy, but in the case of Tsukuyomi, you will also need to have a Dark Skyfall to be able to activate it, so be careful about overcharging this if you don't run such unit in your team. Edgeshot's equip is very similar to Pito's, which was handy in certain farming builds, as this can turn any unit into an auto healer and cleric. A 35% auto heal effect is not that meaningful though, so just like with Pito's equip, you might only be able to run this in very specific builds for older dungeons, like Shura 3. The dark PvP villains synergize a lot better in a team. You'll notice that these units have a 4-turn cooldown and also generate orbs. To actually get these units to deal damage, you will need to guarantee at least 9 dark orbs on the board. This is also very important since these units will actually need a PvP match to activate their leader skill damage reduction. Spinner doesn't really bring much to the table apart from the time buff and damage cap break. Units like Toga could definitely benefit from that since their active skill does not have a cap breaking effect. Running Spinner as a leader is not the best idea though, since his active skill will only be able to cap break one other unit. Not to mention that the effective HP is a little on the low side, and if you choose to use Spinner as an orb generator, you will not be able to heal since his active skill does not guarantee any heal matches. At the very least, Toga is able to give you enough orbs to deal damage and heal, which should be easier since she also gives you a recovery buff. The HP buff and board size fix effects will also be handy for this team as this will allow you to tank large hits and maybe overcome combo void shields. Toga's equip at the moment is the only vanishing equip that grants you team HP Awakening. That, and along with its 5 effective skill boosts, makes it a decent option, especially on a unit with self-reliance. We don't have many of these units yet, and this might not be the best option due to the lack of damage awakenings, as most units with self-reliance tend to also be damage dealers. Due to that, I feel like this is an equip that you could do without. Shigaraki is one of the few units with self-reliance, but it's pretty difficult to enable that awakening as his first stage active skill is on a pretty high cooldown. This unit tends to be the leader for this dark PvP team, and do take note that this unit also becomes an orb generator on a 4-turn cooldown. So your team will either need to run 4 similar units or close the loop with a 2-turn orb generator. Orbskin Shigaraki from the first REM could serve as such unit, but then you would actually have to chase them in that lackluster REM or spend money on the bundle, and I don't think either option is worth the investment. You could run 4 of this new Shigaraki in a team, but that will also be pretty expensive. At the very least, he is exchangeable, so with enough stones, you can assemble a team that has consistent orb generation and a cleric active skill available every single turn. However, 4 unit systems don't have much flexibility, so this team will struggle in dungeons that are filled with multiple mechanics or interruptions, especially if you're tackling endgame content where board strings, HP debuffs, thorns, and super altitude are sure to mess up this leader. His own equip might not have the best active skill, but since this can be on a 1-turn cooldown, activating Shigaraki's self-reliance is not that difficult. Even if you overcharge Shigaraki on turn 1, since these two units have the same evil line, you will be able to choose which active skill to use. The same can be said for All for One and his equip. To getting this unit up and running right away is extremely difficult since he has a 38 base cooldown, which unfortunately comes with a delay. Post-transformation, All for One will serve as an absorption voider with a huge cap break and also be able to destroy 2 shields in a 5-turn cooldown. He is a decent option for this role in dark PvP teams, but since these are not that popular at the moment, outside of the Shigaraki team, I doubt that you'll find that many places where to use this, at least for now. All Might is the orb skin unit for the second REM, and has the highest effective HP at the moment, but as a leader, he's not for everyone. First off, he's a rainbow unit and his teams like to focus around the expert multi-match awakening. You could play him without the 5-second time limit from the awakening, but it will be very important to match a rainbow board in 5 seconds if you want follow-up attack damage, especially if you're running 2 All Mights as leader. The team, however, will also suffer from not having any bonus combos in the leader scale, and since Gonho is putting a lot of combo void shields in newer dungeons, this leader will not do that great in the near future. The new Rainbow badge that just came out in JP can help All Might a little bit, but honestly, the +2 bonus combos won't make much of a dent against both Combo Void and Absorption Shields, as these often require something like 13 or more combos to bypass. This unit's leader skill also only offers 15% damage reduction, so most gravity attacks will be something you'll have to worry about. With 2 All Mights, you do have a looping 50% shield effect, so the team is able to deal with most gravities in the game. However, you will have to worry about possible buff voids. If you like rainbow teams, you could purchase 1 copy to try him out, but I highly doubt that you'll be able to find a lot of All Might helpers, and you will most likely need to chase another copy from the REM, which can get pricey. Since All Might's equip isn't unique enough, I would say that this bundle is something that you can easily skip. Generally, 6 effective skill boosts and 1 team HP are decent for an equip, but I would expect more, especially for $20. Gentle Criminal is somewhat similar to the Narumi duo since he gives you a cleric effect alongside a 75% damage reduction shield on essentially the same cooldown. So for this unit, you'll have to transform them first and use the first stage active skill to get to that cleric and shield active skill. At the very least, this is essentially a 3-turn haste, so it's not that bad. However, the setup and the skill boost requirement needed to transform this unit might be too much of a hassle, so for most dark teams, the Narumi duo is probably the better choice. That Kaiju number 8 duo's cap break is also preferable in most cases, as Gentle Criminals, to enable and cap break, can be easily interrupted by enemies. Gentle Criminal's equip is great if you want to make a unit help recover assist, as this will grant units both an Afternoon Tea and L Awakenings. This is not the only equip that can help any unit recover assist, but this is the first one that adds bulk at the same time. So even if you have the Narumi duo, this mid-rarity unit is a decent get. Stars and Stripe is a strong light unit that has unfortunately diminished in value. She has a decent leader skill, is able to deal a lot of damage, and also has an interesting attribute-changing active skill. Before Valentine Athena and Alina got their new light evos, this unit was pretty much a staple in Reinhardt teams, as this was your solution to void damage shields that would also allow you to change any unit to light attribute as long as you put them between 2 Stars and Stripe. The attribute changing effect to light is basically permanent for that unit in between them, so you could stick anyone in there and get them to deal damage or help recover assist, even if these units didn't have any light pings. Thanks to hindsight, if you only care to get Reinhardt, who happens to be one of the best leaders in the game at the moment, then there's almost no reason why you should be rolling My Hero Academia. On the other hand, even though base Stars and Stripe is not in high demand, her equip can be pretty handy, especially if you need to turn a unit into machine type and give them levitate. Immediately, Christmas Hathor in an Imperial Dramon team comes to mind, so if you don't have any other equips that were mainly from our Gundam reskin, then maybe this mid-priority unit is a unit you would like to chase. The Shoto duo is one of the water and fire units that can be part of a team mostly composed of My Hero units. However, that team is a little bit lackluster, so getting this duo won't be the best use of resources. Nowadays, this is the type of unit that you will want to run in a team to tackle some of the newest dungeons, as a large shield or a large HP buff are basically requirements. This unit's active skill also has a single target gravity and a 1-turn delay, though generally these won't be that useful. Units that boost your effective HP, like Daisuke or New Year Shiba, are usually preferable in a team because they are also able to tackle other common mechanics like Awoken Binds and Pierce. So unfortunately with this duo in a team, you will have less flexibility with the rest of your subs as this unit does not condense enough counters to popular mechanics. The duo's equip is decent for adding bulk, but since T-focused teams are not that popular, most people will probably look over this in favor of other equips that bring more utility or damage to the table. At the very least, the add attacker type awakening might be of use in some teams like Deku and Bakugo's, since that unit can only cap break attacker types. That being said, there are plenty of equips out there that already add that type, so this one is not that special, and thus I find very little reason to exchange for this duo. Shoto can be a leader for a Fire and Water My Hero team where he can serve as an orb generator and absorption voider. You can make a system with 2 copies of this unit to loop those effects, which overall would be pretty good if it weren't for the fact that this unit does not override orbs. Not to mention that there will always be a chance of not having enough orbs to match these. The chances of that are low, but generally, orb changers are not consistent enough, especially for endgame content. Board issues could be solved with a board changer like Dabi or a board expander and roulette unit like you, but if you like those units that can also tackle other common mechanics, then you won't have the easiest time making a decent Shoto team. You could instead run a Shoto system in a Bad Bats Marukuro team, and alongside that leader, you'll have permanent uptime on Damage Void and Absorption Shields. Unfortunately, that Sanrio leader also struggles with overriding orbs, so the team will also have to find solutions to boards that make it impossible to activate your leader skill damage reduction. Shoto's equip is interesting, as the awakenings add a decent amount of bulk, especially in dungeons with lots of fire enemies like the upcoming Sun title, though its active skill might be a little too niche. 6 turns of fire damage void could have interesting applications, but I don't think most dungeons will greatly benefit from this at the start of a dungeon, and since assist removals are a very common enemy mechanic, overcharging this equip later in a dungeon will be close to impossible for most teams. This unit is exchangeable for 5 GFEs or select My Hero units, but I probably wouldn't get them unless you have Bad Bats Marukuro. And you might not even need to get 2 copies, since it is possible to tackle the Sun title with just 1. Here is the team that I use in JP, though do take note that I use 2 RE0 units, and we really don't have any idea if NA will get that collab. Bakugo is also GFE exchangeable, but this unit can fit in various different teams that can match fire orbs. This unit is a damage dealer with a very useful active skill that can help tackle awoken binds, boost your HP, break a shield, and raise his own cap break to 40 billion, all on a 3-turn cooldown. If you include any other unit that is able to tackle unmatchable debuffs like Dabi or Christmas Frag, then your team might not even need to run a cleric. However, you will probably still need to find a unit that has enough hard OEs so that you can heal throughout a dungeon. A 2.5x HP buff is significant enough, and it is higher than someone like Gyu's, who has proven to be useful, especially in Doma teams. But this multiplier might not look that impressive as these type of buffs, just like cap break numbers, keep being inflated. As an example, the Valentine MP unit gives a 4x HP buff, and Daisuke, who is commonly used in Imperial Dramon teams, gives a 3x HP buff. And depending on the team comp, replacing Daisuke with Bakugo might not result in enough bulk to survive hits in dungeons like Sun and Moon. That being said, I still think that Bakugo is one of the better exchanges that you could make during this event, especially if you like fire teams. This unit also has a little bit of synergy in certain Valentine Noah farming setups, so if you have that unit or plan to get it once Valentine rolls around, maybe look into this exchange. Even if you don't end up using him, at least his equip has very solid awakenings that can also help a lot of the recently released attacker and machine fire units that have resonance awakenings. The Hack Duo is exchangeable for collab units, and this fits in nicely in some Fire and Wood TPA teams, like Deku and Bakugo's. However, if you look out and roll 2 of the BGMs, this duo is probably a unit you can skip. However, if you only manage 1 Deku and Bakugo, then this unit is probably the best double absorption voider for Fire and Wood TPA teams. Some versions of the team even run 2 of this unit so that you can have permanent uptime on those voiding effects. However, the first stage active skill happens to be a delay, but maybe you could get some value out of the 35% gravity. This duo's equip can also be used to activate the Resonance Awakening of recently released fire attackers, though maybe the attack multiplier is a bit lacking since sometimes you would rather have a Levitate or Tensei Awakening. But a unit like Imperial Dramon doesn't need much help when it comes to damage, and that unit could actually put the TPA to use as it is very common to run an unmatchable Leighton in one of your 3 Imperial Dramons. though maybe you have better options that have both a TPA and SDR awakening, as the latter will allow the base unit to be able to resist up to 4 turns of skill delays. Again, the main reason why you should be exchanging for this unit is if you're interested in this Deku and Bakugo team that only requires one of the BGM on your side. If you were lucky enough to roll 2 of the BGMs and have the rest of the subs in this team, then I think that you can completely skip on the hack duo. This BGM makes up a 2-unit system that will give you a looping 22 billion cap rate to attacker types. The cap rate number is pretty high, but this is offset a little bit by the fact that this BGM only has 2 attributes. Even without the ping, a properly built team will still definitely pump out a lot of damage similar to other meta leaders. A system will also give you a looping 1.5 HP buff and piercing effects. On top of that, you will also generate enough orbs to activate this unit's leader skill. Though one thing to note is that this orb gen does not override orbs, so if an enemy hits you with a full fire or heal board, then you will not be able to activate this unit's leader skill damage reduction. And even if that doesn't happen, the resulting board might not be the best to deal with assist removals, and this is a reason why Mina's orb gen will improve this team's consistency. Still, Mina herself also doesn't override orbs, so it's very important that you have a unit in your team that can help you deal with bad boards. The BGM's equip is one of the few ones that has a double power break awakening, though personally, I don't think that 2 power break equips are all that busted, but this one does look a little bit more impressive because just like with the Hack Duo's equip, the TPA awakening can be pretty handy on certain units, like Imperial Dramon. Therefore, it's not hard to see why the big chase for My Hero Academia is the BGM unit, as again, this works well as a leader and sub for Fire and Wood teams, and also has a relatively unique equip at the moment. If you like the other units in the Mina team, then this bundle is probably one you could skip or not bother chasing. It is possible to make a Deku Bakugo team without Kaiju number 8 units by using other My Hero units like Bakugo and the Hack Duo, but this team will not perform that well in newer dungeons due to the lower recovery buff from the BGM's leader skill. Not to mention, if you care for farming parts, you will have to stack up to 9 or 10 power break awakenings across your whole team to guarantee that parts drop, since the BGM's leader skill does not boost drop rates. If all of this is a deal breaker and you already have a meta team like Imperial Dramon's, then honestly, it might not be a bad idea to skip this collab altogether. Deku and Bakugo is still a strong unit, but it seems like Fire and Wood support has slowed down in JP, so this unit might be at its peak right now. If you're swimming in GFE fodder, maybe look into exchanging for Bakugo. This unit is not a bad fire damage dealer that can tackle a few mechanics on a low cooldown. His 2.5x HP buff might not be enough to cut it in future dungeons, but at the very least, you could obtain this unit without spending any magic stones. There are other competing units like Daisuke from Digimon and the Mina Duo from Kaiju number 8, so if you have those other units, then maybe this exchange is also something you can easily skip. Shoto is maybe another exchange that some could look into, but I would only recommend this for those that like to run the Bad Bats Maro Kurotobi team. This collab has other useful equips like Gentle Criminals, X-Shots, Star and Stripes, Togas, and Irravities, but these unfortunately are REM only units, so if you don't have a lot of magic stones, maybe don't get your hopes up. Outside of these, units like All Might, Dabi, Monoma, Natsume, and Hado either support unique playstyles or sport niche equips that could come in handy in co-op or ranking dungeons. But generally, I think that most people can also survive without these. I would recommend checking all of the units that I have on screen and see if your monster box will benefit from any of them, which I'll note are also all from the second REM. The REM1 units are honestly not that good, so I would recommend staying away. There are some usable equips here and there, but these aren't unique enough to warrant any investment. The MP unit of the collab might be worth picking up if you enjoy rainbow teams. This unit is basically an improved Maid Cecilia that is better suited for endgame content, since the triple HP buff can drastically boost your team's bulk in preparation for large hits. ReZero and Freeren do have some fire TPA support like All and Stark, but these are REM only units and will not drastically improve the Deku and Bakugo teams. So it seems to me like the overall value of the collab has dropped since we in NA know of the events and collabs to come. Star and Stripe is a unit that greatly diminishes in value since this is no longer a staple in the typical Reinhardt team, and getting Valentine Athena and Alina will be a lot easier since those are exchangeable units. So if that ReZero team is of any interest to you, then I think it'll be more worthwhile to spend resources on Valentine's. However, keep in mind that ReZero and Freeren are not yet confirmed for us in NA, but the teams there will require a lot of investment. So if you don't mind waiting, maybe skip My Hero and start saving up now. In addition, we'll be seeing 3 new badge GFEs in the near future. None of the badges are board chasing, but if you're interested in getting them right away, you will have to try your luck in their debut Super Gadfest, which happens to cost 20 Magic Stones per pull. Pad Academy usually returns to JP in April. I doubt that seasonal will have a lot of interesting units, but you never know. Pad Cafe will probably rerun soon in JP, but surprisingly, we haven't gotten any word on the rerun even though they ran a survey months ago. Out of the events that are hopefully slated to come to NA, I think most players are more excited about ReZero and Freerun. But what are your plans? Will you be rolling My Hero or be saving up for those future collabs? Best of luck if you're rolling. Thank you guys for watching, and a special thank you goes to Pages Number 1, Austin, and Awkward Panda, Braulio, Breastfeeding Obama, Daniel, Lingo Dante, Hexen, JD, T Bunnyfish, and Way for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.